It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brand Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is CEO Peter Strahm. Peter is a purely entrepreneurial business executive with more than 30 years of leadership experience in the food and beverage industry. He has a proven track record, including several major beverage industry success stories, with Peter influencing and impacting every step along the way from the launch to maturity. Peter has worked for some great names in the industry, including PepsiCo, Snapple, Jones Soda, and Red Bull, before becoming the CEO and founder of Drink King Distributing Company. Peter has his BS in Marketing and Information Decision Sciences from Fordham University and his MBA in Marketing and Management from Wagner College. Peter Strahm, welcome into the corner office.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much.
Peter, we like to get started a little bit about your early years, and maybe you can tell us a bit about where you grew up and what your family life was like.
Yeah, well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in Staten Island. Family life was pretty busy. I had 4 siblings and pretty big household, 7 people in there, all doing different things. And
where did you stack in the pecking order? Were you
right in the middle?
Right in the middle. Okay.
Yeah, I was right in the middle of it. So I had an older brother, older sister, and a younger brother and younger sister, and a lot of sports and school and everything took a big precedent in our house, and we were religious family. So Sundays were spent at church early on, and the rest of the day was baseball and family dinners. So it was.
Tell me about your parents. Mom sounds like she was probably stay at home with that many kids.
Yeah, Mom was a stay at home and very active in the school. So if you did anything wrong at school, Mom was usually in either PTA or she
knew about it,
doing something. She was very well connected. So with 5 children in different schools at one time. She was very busy and kept us moving. It was an era also that, when you had practices and all of that, we used to, jump on our bikes and go and there were no cell phones. You got home when the light went on. So, it was one of those things where we were, we did our thing. She was the kind of the monitor of all that, and Dad worked all day and came home and then jumped into the coaching ranks as soon as he got home. So we were.
Was Dad a professional? Did he work as a laborer? What was his?
Dad worked for the New York Post, and he was actually a machinist, and eventually did all the layout of the paper itself. So they used to do it with first with big printing presses, and then they ended up going towards computers that laid everything out. So he reinvented himself several different times over the course of his life, and became really probably more of a computer guy than anything.
What were some of the influences of your parents, if you had to name a couple of things that you would say are lasting memories in terms of the things that you remember from from growing up?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing for all of us is kind of 3 things my dad really was pressing all the time was hard work. He always felt that you had your work ethic that was going to be, primary to how successful you were. Honesty and integrity were a huge, part of his character. So even when it could hurt you, meaning that, hey, you might have done something wrong and get in trouble for it, you had to come up and take accountability. Which realistically in the business world for all of us, we've always done that. If we put our neck out there, and made a mistake, we kind of took accountability for it and went on from there. Obviously, we're successful because we make less mistakes than have successes. But I think a successful part of anybody's business career is to take advantage of the fact that they can be wrong sometimes and that they can learn from it and take accountability for it. And that's what drove my dad and my mom. I mean, my mom was the same way. It was always honesty was the foremost, authority. And then at the last piece, it's really spirituality. I mean, the both of them were very strong religiously. We all believe in God and believe that we basically we're judged at a different level than just what you deal with here. That whole work ethic, spirituality, the honesty part is kind of driven all five of the siblings. So it's a very huge influence. The other part for me is I had a grandma at my mom's side of the family that was very strong-willed and very spiritual in her own right. And she was a big influence on me in staying with the faith and really driving myself to be better, each day. She was another big influence.
Still active in the Catholic Church today?
I am, yeah, yeah. I mean, I went to Farrell High School, which was a Catholic high school. I went to Fordham University. I mean, I've pretty much grown, throughout my life. I've leaned, to the church for strength.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm interested to hear how that's impacted your business life as well. Were you a good student in school?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I was more a B plus student by foundation, but I got A's because I worked my butt off for them. My two sisters were a little different. They seemed to get those A's a little easier. The boys seemed to have to push for them.
More distractions. Right?
Yeah, but but we were all the athletic side too. So all three boys played a lot of sports and everything. And
what were some of your favorite sports?
Baseball was the biggest one. I actually played that in college eventually.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And,
at Fordham?
Yeah, at Fordham University, I was a catcher, and I played quarterback in high school for a while, and basketball a lot. But baseball was probably the driving force on the athletic side.
Any other extracurriculars, things like music or theater, other things that you were involved in, student government?
Student government, yes. Actually, I was the president of my intermediate school, IS 24, way back when, and got into a lot more government stuff in both high school and college. But I would always want to say music, but I'm really one of the worst singers you probably ever will come across.
It's that Brooklyn accent, Peter.
Yeah, I played the trombone out in my 6th to 8th grade years until I became a football player. Then you couldn't do both. You couldn't play in the halftime and be in there getting instruction. So, but I enjoy trying to play instruments and everything, and it's just more of a hobby on that end. My wife always tells me I'm tone deaf, so I can't really ever succeed at it, but it's definitely something I love to do. But the thing right now that I really drives me outside of work is coaching. I coach youth sports. I coached my kids as they were growing up, and really put a lot of time and effort on my time off into doing that. And now it's just one where I don't have any one of my kids playing in the sports, but I'm coaching a lot of other people's kids and
you've got grandkids now too. I think you'd mentioned
I got
the
one.
last time we spoke.
I got one.
Right. So those will be in the sports scene soon. Talking about sports, and you mentioned your grandmother as an influencer. Were there coaches or other people that you were involved with growing up that also were strong influencers in your life? And if so, who were they, and what types of things did you learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that actually influenced my life was a Little League coach, Mr. Larry Kidd. And ironically, my son and I were just talking about him. It was one of those guys where, I was a shy kid, had a lot of talent, and I wasn't really pressing hard. And when I was around 10, 11, 12 years old, and around 11 years old, I was getting very frustrated with the sport, baseball, and he was pressing me at every turn, and I was almost ready to give it up. That's how much he was pressing me. And then one time I just went to my dad and said, listen, I don't think this guy likes me, and I find out later that, the guy.
The opposite was true.
Yeah, the opposite was true. My dad approached him and he goes, man, that's a shame because I actually love him. He goes, he's got a lot in him, but he's not bringing it out. And he sat with me at one point and said, listen, he goes, you may not like me in the long run. He goes, but, I really feel that if I go and press you hard, you're going to become something that you really want to be. And that's my job. So my job is to get out of you what you don't think you have in you. And once it comes out, it can flourish, and I'd be happy for that. I'd be prideful of that. And sure enough, that's what he did. My 12-year-old year was a turnaround year for me. I became almost dominant, to the age group that I was in, and this guy was the reason why. And it really, it was the same time about a year later where I'm going for to be a president of my intermediate school. You had to do 6 different assemblies where you had to speak at them and answer questions. And again, for a shy kid, it all came from really understanding my athletic ability and then saying, you know what, I got a lot more to offer. I got, I can speak, I can rationalize, I can logic, I can connect with people. I learned all of that in that 12 to 13 range, which is kind of odd. Most people at that point are just really looking at riding their bikes and, skipping stones. And, I was starting to learn how to present. For the first time, I was presented in front of a large group of kids, and kids are not very easy on the speaker. They'll heckle and do whatever they want to do, and then when they like what they like, they'll cheer it. So it was all that one guy, that decided.
What a legacy.
Besides my parents, but it was something that. The unfortunate part is I also, around 13, he unfortunately, when I was going back to go see him, which is what was a tradition. Like most of the kids who got off his team would come back and help with the younger kids, and he ended up passing away. So it was very suddenly.
Well, how nice that you remember his legacy and his name, right?
Yeah,
and the lessons learned from him.
Yeah. Many years later, I'm a little more, a lot farther away from 12 years old than I want to remember.
But you remember those lessons, don't you?
I do.
And emulate some of them, I'm sure, with some of your charges.
But, when I was also very lucky that I had a lot of teachers that were, anywhere from my grammar school right up to high school to college that, always, they saw my work ethic, they saw my drive, and they saw my inquisitive nature to talk to them and try to learn more than just what's on the book, And they liked that, and they really took a liking to me, most people, and I would end up getting extra time with them. And like I said, when you're a B plus student by nature, and you got to get that A, connecting with the teacher and getting the extra help is something you need. And I always went and got it, and they were very, very helpful. So I know a lot of people don't get the same experience, but I've gotten many. I mean, there's too many even to name. Teachers that were always, really pressing hard to make sure I got the most out of myself, which it's probably the schools that I picked. Fordham University and Farrell High School were just 2 very strong, willed schools in their own right, and I'm glad I picked them, because those schools themselves influenced who I am.
What about entrepreneurial things? Were you doing any of those as a kid? And if so, what, Peter?
Yeah, actually, I started off, obviously I was one of those kids that liked the lemonade stand. That's,
right.
I did that. And but I ran my own paper route, in between, I'd practice sports and everything, and I'd be jumping out either early in the morning delivering papers or later on in the day, depending on which paper it was. So I grew, I had probably one of the largest paper routes on Staten Island, and it spanned, many blocks. So, had several hundred, houses that I had to deal with. So I'd cart things, and really do it by foot, and I wouldn't be able to do it by bike. And it was it was a lot of carrying and a lot of, and also connecting, it was weird. I like to connect with the customer at that point in time too. Because
those are the days when you had to go door to door and collect your subscription money, right? Yeah,
right.
Sure.
So
you're working
service experience, and you're working for tips.
That's right. Particularly those Christmas tips.
So making sure, I had a good arm, but I wanted to make sure instead of throwing the paper, it got in the mailbox. And
right.
And especially on those rainy days, it was one of those things where people really appreciated it. And I did that through high school. I worked some jobs during the summer where I worked construction. I worked with a pool company. I did many different things, and more of on the physical labor side. But anytime I got an opportunity, I'd ask them for chances to sell. I wanted to learn how to really hone in that skill. And it was one that took a while. When you're in your 16, 17, 18-year-old time frame and you're trying to, sell to somebody anything, whether it be a pool, whether it be a service or anything else. It's not an easy thing for a young kid to do, and especially when you're dealing with most adults, who want a deal, as
Right,
well.
exactly. Right,
Everybody's
right.
looking for a deal, and they didn't treat you any different. But
That's right.
it was
In fact, if anything, they probably were harder on you. They wanted to teach you a few
yeah,
things.
yeah. But it was, it was really, a lot of fun to do, and I took it as more of a challenge. And when you failed, it wasn't really as devastating, because you were just learning, and I think that carried over into my adult years. When a lot of times, I mean, when I did a lot of sales out there for years, and you got more rejection sometimes than positives, you know.
That's true.
So, you got to learn to deal with it. I mean, I try to tell people all the time. I said, it's basically the food and beverage industry is almost more of an industry of rejection, than it is of successes. And the ones that are successful, the ones that kind of just continue to push on. You're going to have a good day. The better part is when you're having those great days, you just keep riding them. You stay out as late as you want. And that's where a lot of people mistake. When you're on a hot streak, it's like a batter in baseball. If, you're hitting the ball one day, you want to make sure you get as many at bats as you can that day. The days that you're not going so well, you want the game to end,
That's right. The day to start over. Was it a foregone conclusion that you'd go to college? It sounds like Dad didn't go, correct? Was that, or did he
Dad
have a
did
degree?
not. Dad actually didn't even finish high school,
Got
and
it. Yeah.
and
Well,
mom did. I mean, she barely did on that end. I mean, my mom and dad, they were born towards my mom was right in the beginning of the Great Depression, and my dad was
right,
a little
sure.
after. And there was a lot different decisions they
Different
had to
time.
make as children when they got into their 40s and the 1950s. I mean, they had to do a lot more things. My dad was a military guy. My mom and him actually went out to Italy for several years during the Korean War. And my older sister was born out there. She was actually an Italian. She could have been a dual citizen, but chose the United States around when she was 21 years old. But she was born out in Verona, and they had a pretty crazy life, and with the war and everything else, and service to his country, and then coming back, and then right away having a second and third kid almost immediately. And something that they did before many, if you know the area, Brooklyn, is the big city part of it, but then Staten Island was the country. And my dad, for the opportunity to get a home, he moved his kids to Staten Island. And at that point, there was no bridge, there was ferry systems only coming out of here. So it was a definite harder lifestyle, to deal with working in Manhattan.
More isolated.
When you're dealing with Staten Island until the bridge got up. So again, they always, the college part of it was something where my dad said, hey, you got to do better than me.
Why don't you step up?
Right. And my older sister and older brother didn't choose that route. They went right to work. And, with myself, I think baseball played a part in it because I had a lot of teams at that time recruiting me to play. And, Fordham was one of the many that I was going towards. And ironically, my Father Gannon, which was a very close friend of my family's and my guidance counselor in high school, was a baseball player in the 50s for Fordham. And I think I would have to say he had a little influence on me going there because he felt I'd be close to home, still be away, because it wasn't with baseball and everything. I still wouldn't be, home every day. I would be living there. And but then still be around my family and still be able, because being the first one at college, the first thing that happens is mom and dad get a little depressed when they don't have you around anymore.
Sure. One's out of the house, out of the coop.
Yeah, there was no cell phones or any of that kind of stuff, and so you had to call on a payphone, and so they weren't as connected. But being where I could take a train and a ferry home and stuff, I was able to do that once in a while and made them happy. So,
what did you study in college?
Actually, I started out as a computer science major. They called it information decision sciences. I did that for a couple of years. When I first got into college, that was the big deal. Computers were starting to come up big. This was early 80s, and the money was there to be a programmer and to work in that field. I quickly found that I really wasn't that suited for sitting at a desk and programming. And around my sophomore year, I started getting into the marketing side. And I said, you know what, I really enjoy the sales and marketing piece. So I actually had a dual major. I came out of Fordham with a marketing degree and a computer science degree. And when I was playing 4 years of college baseball and hauling down a dual degree. It was a pretty huge task, but I take an extra class every semester, and still ended up with that that B plus average. That's where I was at, but it was one of those things where I just wanted to go and kind of get a more worldly view of and have more than one option. So marketing became the second option.
What was that first job, that first full-time job you took out of college?
I actually I put the two things together, and I sold computer services for ADP. I did that for about a year before hitting the beverage industry at PepsiCo.
Do you remember the first time you started managing people, Peter?
Yeah, actually, it was. It's kind of a two-part question, because at ADP I managed the technical support team that was with me, because when we did sales stuff, the more technical stuff we had to back up. So I managed their time and some of their tasks. But I would really say it wasn't until I got into my second tier of jobs at PepsiCo when I had to manage routes and different the people that ran the routes, whether it be drivers or
sales leadership,
salesmen. Yeah, so you had to get through. It wasn't easy, because I was also younger than most of the guys I was managing. So it was, my first thing was really to get into their heads and understand how they think, because when you get at that time, this is like 1985, into the late 80s, where I was at Pepsi, and there was definitely two different generations that were at work there. There's the new up and coming generation of guys like myself that have already started getting into the computer end of the business, and reporting was kind of second nature to us. So, then there's a whole bunch of guys that came from the Vietnam area and earlier on that, didn't really, they were salesmen and not much else. The reporting, the detail, all that stuff was more annoyance to them. And they had to learn all that stuff. So they, way back when, there wasn't a lot of detail, to the sale. You either made it or you didn't.
Right, right.
In our area, I was very lucky. I got a chance to work for a man called Harold Honigman, which was one of the biggest icons and still is in our industry. And he was really into understanding and analyzing, the business itself. So each route, understanding what the pros and cons of the route are, and where we can go and really look for more sales, and how do we go and show sophistication to the calls. You would walk in with a nice portfolio of information as to what brands are moving faster for them, how can they get displays that are going to be more active for them. These are all things that most people they kind of pressed but didn't really delve into why. And he was the first one that really did that, and I got a great opportunity to learn from that. It was just a very, for a big business that it was very well connected as a family unit. So early on, your managers and everybody were almost like your work dads at the time. They were delving into a lot more than just your work ethic, and with the time you're at work, they got involved in having conversations, if you wanted to, about your family life and your personal ambitions and all that, because they felt if they knew that stuff, that they could steer you in the right direction on what the next job level would be for you.
Tell me about some of those early leadership lessons from some of those bosses and mentors.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest lesson, that first came out is the attention to detail on, what to, inspect what you expect. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you got expectations that are out there in the trade, but you're going to have to go out and look at them. You got to go out and connect, and that's even, even with the social media life of today. I mean, I find the most successes is when I go out in the trade and actually still watch people, bricks and mortar work going out there. How am I going to go and talk to a buyer about any kind of new program or anything if I'm not sure what the mechanisms are going on in the store? How are they placing it on the floor now? How are the displays going up? What's the competition like to get those additional placements? If I don't know that and see that, I can't go and put a more sophisticated program together to take advantage of what they need. I need to understand it. So those were lessons that were really embedded in me from the Pepsi system. Is you got to learn what the consumer and what the customer wants. So your client is the store in this case, or the buyer, but really what did their end user want? Because if you don't understand any of that, you really can't put a proper program together. And then the other piece to that is do you understand the economics of all of it? When I was at the Snapple side of it, the biggest part of their difference than anybody else is they always saw the economic piece as a pie. So the customer gets something, the store gets something, the distributor gets something, and the owner of the brand gets something, and we got a share in that. And the ones that did the best, the most successful, like the Snapple brand, understood that everybody had to get a win. Other brands that I saw that didn't work as well were the ones that said, you know what, I'm going to take most of the pie for myself and let everybody kind of fight for it, fight for that extra money. And that didn't work. In the short term, it might have made you a few more dollars, but in the long term, it really kind of hurt your brand because there was no real loyalty to the brand.
Well, what's kind of the worst lesson you've learned from previous bosses?
It's kind of a little wide range of that because I've learned. I try to go and pick apart the characteristics parts of some of the leaders that I was with, not to micromanage too much. That's one of the first things. Less micro. There's a time and place to micromanage, and when I see it is when there's a learning opportunity, where there's a new manager or there's a manager that's been around a while that's kind of set in their ways, and you can work with them to try to find a new way to do something, or for the younger people, the initial way to do something. How do you set their foundation of how they approach a plan? So often, when you're micromanaging, you're really kind of looking at negatives, and that's what I guess what most micromanagers say: we're doing this wrong, we're doing that wrong, we're doing this wrong. Instead of just saying, you know what, here's what you're doing right. You got this piece to it. Is really working well. Now, how do we build off that? And that's where when you're kind of micromanaging, it's not helping the problem solve as much. It's really just showing the problem, and that's where I've learned from a lot of the negative results that some of the managers had out there. That you got to let people thrive a little bit. You got to let people make mistakes. You got to and you got to then teach them from that. I also learned from the good influencers that, if you're not failing, you're not trying.
That's right. Failure is part of the equation.
Yeah. And the other is the negative part too on some of the people that were unsuccessful or weaker managers, I would say, because most of them were successful in some way, or they wouldn't have got up to that point. But when you think you know it all, you feel that this is the way it worked for me, and it's going to work that way for you, and so you're pressing what worked for you on to someone else. And, I'll give you a great example is the Red Bull world that I was in was very, very highly successful and still is. It's one of the best marketing machines that I've ever been involved with. The ideas that come out of it, they're very innovative, and they're constantly recreating themselves in a world that is very difficult to do, especially when you're in the number one position in most markets. But, too often that people leave that environment and they think that, well, they work for Red Bull, that's just going to work. It's just going to work here. And they bring all these Red Bull ideals and they bring it out to another brand and it just dies. The brand fails. And I've seen that so often. So much of my counterparts that have left Red Bull as I did, they find themselves in difficult situations because they tried to fit what they knew from Red Bull into a spot that it just didn't work. And every brand and every, business you go into is going to have some things that work that in the past and other things you're going to have to learn to adjust to that's going to maximize that brand's culture and that brand's ability to succeed. And that's where I've learned that from the negative people, from the weaker leaders, that, what, if you stay strong to what you believe only and you don't go and you have those blinders on, you're virtually going to fail eventually. You almost have to, because you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and it just don't work.
Peter, you've worked for some great companies. Obviously, early on, EDP, you worked for Pepsi, Red Bull, and of course now with your own company. How would you say your leadership style has evolved over time?
And realistically, it's all the experience load that comes with all that. As a leader, I kind of wish I would be the guy I am today when I was the CEO of Snapple, Distribution Corp. way back when, because there was, just knowing the knowledge base that I have and the understanding of different circumstances could have taught a lot more people a lot better than I did. And I thought I was a really, really good teacher back then. I really thought I was engaged, and I was probably, in relation to other peers, I was, which is what made me able to go on and do bigger and better things. But, what I realize now is that, youth is wasted a little bit on the young, as they say.
That's so true.
I never thought I'd ever utter those words. My dad used to say them all the time, but I understand what he means now. Now that I'm in my 50s and I've been at this for over 30 years, and I understand that the experience level itself has made me a different leader. It's made me a lot more thoughtful and compassionate. It's made me a lot more understanding of when problems come up as to why they do. It also allows me to give many alternatives to individuals instead of, just one, and in today's day and age with a lot of millennials out there, they learn differently. They learn by example in a lot of ways. They also have a quality about them where, they want something more than just the daily grind of the job, which everybody sees as a negative in a lot of ways, entitled or whatever you want to call it. But you know what? I see it as a different scenario. They're actually a step ahead of where we were, where they don't just work for a company for 30 years for the sake of doing it, and they're not just about the paycheck, even though they want a good one, but they're not just about that. They're about a lot of other things. And I think that's my leadership style is now. It's all about a lot of other things than just the bottom line.
Tell us a little bit about Drink King. I know you founded the company. How long has it been in existence and how many employees?
Yeah, 6 years, and we've got about 90 employees right now.
Congratulations.
And it's really was born out of necessity. I had actually created my own brand called Nth Degree, which was an all natural sports drink that was going to compete with the Gatorade, positioning out there, Powerade, and a better for you kind of drink. And when I was looking at the New York market in particular, New York, New Jersey market, brands have to get, there's a lot of time and effort. People, look at these brands and think that it happened overnight. And I'll give you a great phrase from the Lenny Marsh, one of the owners of Snapple, which said it took him 14 years to become an overnight success.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that because it's so true. It was so much hard work and really constant grind on any, with any brand that you're dealing with, especially when you're trying to, kind of change people's way of thinking. And I needed to have a distribution network that was going to be out there, kind of massaging the account and working it, because the sales weren't going to be there initially, and you were going to have to keep the account engaged and positioning the brand right. So we decided to do it on our own, and we created this Drink King company 6 years ago and said, look, we're gonna distribute our own brand. Ironically, as soon as I kind of put the shingle up, brands, we had a great brand, which is one of the more, best brands out there right now, in Sparkling Ice, that came to us and said, hey, look, we need help. We need help out there,
That's amazing.
And it was really a great match. I mean, I would have to say, they are one of the more fantastic suppliers. If you can emulate a supplier, I would always point to, Sparkling Ice, the Talking Rain crew, that, they've been always, very supportive to me as a distributor. And, when we first started this, them getting, helped me get vendor ID numbers from chain stores that nobody else would give me, because I had this fast moving good. And I feel like I think they feel like I've reciprocated with the hard work and effort to grow the brand and eventually help them, gain their distribution, which is so solidly out there now in the U.S., but we help them do the Northeast. And, so it became now all of a sudden I'm on this Drink King company, and the brand started to fade a little bit and get out of my focus lane, and the distribution company quickly became the one that that really was needed.
The driver.
There,
Yeah. Interesting.
And so now, where I probably would have told you when I first started, I was such a supplier guy for a while with Red Bull and, VP there and Snapple and everything else before Drink King, was all supplier orientated. And once I, and then also, like I said, once they said, you're always trying to get out and they drag you back in, the old Godfather saying, but that's really what it's like. I'm a distributor.
Now you're a distribution guy.
I'm a distributor at heart in a lot of ways, but now I have such a huge amount of supplier experience that I believe it's also made me a better distributor, because we become more than just a distribution partner. We're actually a strategic partner. I got a wealth of knowledge that I can pass on to brands, and some brands have taken that opportunity and almost get a free consultant and added into the distribution network, but others have not. And unfortunately, when they have not, later on they find out that Pete Strahm knew what the hell he was talking about.
Share with me your thoughts about building a company culture, particularly at Drink King.
Yeah, it's a lot harder on the distribution side, because you got a lot more bricks and mortar stuff going on, and a different style of individual. They're very more rugged, and having to take the rejection part. Like I said, it's a whole lifestyle of rejection when you're out there selling, especially
Right.
when you have to bring cases and do it on a truck. It's a different dynamic, and to build it, it really has to be by being a role model. I try. The hardest thing, and we are still creating. By the way, in 6 years, we're still creating the culture here, because there are turnover that happens very early. We're finally stabilized, and a lot of the people that are at the lower levels of our business, which turned over quicker when you were brand new,
Getting started. Yeah.
And some of the managers have been here now for the 6 years. That stability. So creating that culture is the stability of management. The role model and their leadership person, which is me, is we wanted to create a family style business where there's flexibility, similar to what I saw at the Pepsi level when I was there, and the Snapple company, and even Red Bull at its earliest stages were very family orientated. There was flexibility. We put a lot of hours in. So for instance, if I got someone who wants to really badly see that play that the child is in, they got a fourth grader that's in a play at 10 in the morning on a Thursday. That's very hard for somebody, that's working at, 4, 5:30 in the morning till, late in the afternoon to get to see that, unless there's a supportive company behind them. And we encourage it. We want people. I was a coach. I want people to coach. I want people connecting to their children. I want the children, to respect their dad and their mom for more than just what they're doing in the job. That was something my mom and dad instilled in me, that life, nobody, at the very end, and, my dad has passed, about a decade ago now. And the one thing he said right before that is like, I don't wish I worked more. I wish I would have spent more time with
the family. Yeah.
And
you never
that's
get
what,
that time back.
And that's what he always preached. And that's what we try to say here. Look, I had a boss, Carl Gilman at Snapple, that said one time, he goes, look, I'm going to be the guy that's trying to pull you from your family, and you're the person that needs to stay with them, And what he meant by that, I never really got it early. I'm thinking like, well, if you're doing that, why don't you just
why
stop?
Keep doing it?
Yeah. But what he meant is, look,
balance is up to you.
Yeah, I got the business. I have to really drive the business, and you're part of that key cog in that. So I'm going to want to have you here as much as I can. But the real importance is, as a person, for you to be connected with your family and be happy, because all this you're doing is for them. And those are the kind of things that, as a culture here, that I just remember and want to instill, is that, I want the family unit to be important. I want them to have that kind of drive. But in the same token, if I do all that for you, I think that your loyalty to me is going to be strong. So there's a business aspect to that, where I'm going to, when I need you, you're going to be here,
We talked about this a little earlier, and maybe you can just, shine some light on the culture, the importance of your faith and your spiritual transition. How does that play out at Drink King?
It's more or less on that conscience basis. When you're dealing with decisions as a CEO, a lot of them become very clinical. You're looking at dollars and cents, and as you're in a growing company, it's hard to not look beyond the bottom line and say, look, the bottom line is obviously what's going to, if we don't have a bottom line and you don't make money, you're not going to be able to pay anybody's salary, So that is important. But to get there, sometimes may take a little longer than you want it to. And the reason why is because in order to create that culture, you got to have a sense of, of belonging, So my spirituality basically shows that, hey, you know what? they're human beings here that have needs and wants, and they you have the social awareness to a lot of things that you're doing. It's a completely different scenario than when we were first growing up in the business. Giving back to the community and making sure that the business is economically and community-wise sustainable. You want to make sure that you're not contributing to pollution and everything else. I mean, there's a lot of different things that go involved into your decision making while trying to balance the bottom line. So that's the spirituality part of it is that, again, I'm judged off of a far different judge than just a man. So I believe that I can look myself in the mirror every single night and know that my effort was true and honest, and that drives me. And I look on a Sunday morning when I'm in church, most of the time I spend just praying for the patience and praying for the understanding of trying to keep an open mind. I mean, those are the things that on a spiritual side I try to make sure that God instills in me every week to remind myself to be patient with people. The older I get, that could be harder,
Yes, indeed.
So I pray a little harder every Sunday.
One more Hail Mary.
One more.
I love it. You've been very generous with your time, Peter, but we do have a couple other questions. We want to talk a little bit about interviewing. What do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in?
What I like to know is really, when I'm looking at somebody, what's their best and worst day, when I'm looking at trying to find out what they are and how I get into the interview process. I want to know a little bit about their background. I want to know what makes them tick, and I want to know what they think their best and worst attributes are, their best characteristics. And usually I'll ask them, hey, what do you think was the most successful day you had? What was the most what's the most successful job you feel that you've ever done? And it's a task, not really the job itself, because some jobs span many years. So I like a more precise. This is where the micromanaging piece comes in. Is let's get down to a nitty gritty of strong detail. And what was your worst day? And how did you handle that? I always feel it's not the loss. When you have a loss and when you make a mistake, it's not that defines you, but it's how you reacted to it. Did you kind of turtle and introvert and not attack it? Did you blame others? I mean, a lot of times you're not going to get that into an interview, but what you will get into an interview, you get an insight as to what they think is a bad day, what they think is lack of accountability or something else. You'll get a nice tidbit out of that to find out what makes something important and not important to that individual. And once you get that dynamic and you can understand what they think is success and failure, you can start to grow from the work ethic. You got to see what kind of individual they're going to be and loyalty to the business. And it takes a lot more questions than just a couple of those, but you're progressing to a point where what I really want to know is that person here to answer the bell every morning? I'm in a business that you got to be here. You got to be here, and is it important to them? When they're gonna, everybody wants to go on a vacation at some point in time, but with me, on a Friday before a vacation is probably my most busiest day because I want to make sure there's nothing really that's left hanging out there. I see a lot of other people, when you ask them, sometimes they'll just, say, look, well, once I'm out of there, I'm out of there, and that's not the person you eventually want to have with you, because you want somebody that's really making sure that the business can sustain itself for the week or so that they're away. And you find that out just through those right questions, where's their head at and what do they feel is important to them.
What career and life advice would you give to someone who's, got their eyes on their own corner office or perhaps like you, has worked for larger companies like myself early in the career and then has gone on and found something on their own and wants to become an entrepreneur that runs their own company?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give two things. And one is, be prepared to grind it out. If you're going to get to that corner office, you didn't get there because of luck.
That's so true.
You really
didn't.
Luck helps
now and then.
it helps, but it's not the only reason
That's
why
correct.
You're going to get in there. And it's going to, look, there's going to be bad days. There's going to be really bad days out there that you're going to question why you're doing what you're doing. look, as an entrepreneur now at Drink King, there were some days where, I wasn't sleeping and going, wow, what did I do? Why did I get involved in this? There's a lot of money being put into it, a lot of, you get a lot of time and effort, and you didn't feel like it was going to, come to fruition, and then you just keep grinding it out, and it eventually gets there. So whatever you think you want to be, or whatever you think you want to accomplish, you're not going to do that overnight. You're gonna do that over time. And the other thing is never think you can't do something. That is the one thing I think when I look at people who fail at whatever they set out to do, is that they listen to somebody to tell them they can't do it. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people told me that Drink King would never make it, and still till today. I mean, they're still telling me, oh, they'll fail because they're fighting. They're in a business where they're fighting Coke and Pepsi and big distributors, and that the brand portfolio is not exactly like the other guys, and everything else. They just keep telling you that, and if I listened to all of it, we would have closed the doors
years ago, probably.
Many years ago. And look, it may end up where one day you close a door, but it wasn't going to be because you felt you couldn't do it. It was basically because the circumstances and that luck piece is not there. You get a couple of bad scenarios that come up that just, create a bad, environment that you can't overcome. But honestly, I have never met that environment yet that I can't overcome. I mean, I guess so never think you can't do something, never stop trying, keep grinding it out. And realistically, you should have, on the final piece, I'll add a third in there, is have a heart, be in there where you that spirituality, the faith and understanding of who you are and who somebody else is, whether you're religious or you're not, humanitarian, tasks are there for everybody, no matter what you believe in. And
putting your people first.
It's very fulfilling to do something for somebody else. Create a job, create something that is there that's going to help a family. I help 90 families right now. And if someday that the business closes, I know that for 6 years, them and many others, made a living off of us. And that to me is probably the most prideful thing I take from it.
Peter Strahm, thank you so much for your time and sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.